Welcome to the Tank Podcast. In this episode, our fashion director Caroline Issa is joined by London-based designer Holly Fullton, one of the co-founders of the Emergency Designer Network, a volunteer-led collective rallying the fashion industry to support hospital stocks of scrubs and masks in the face of the COVID-19 crisis. They discuss how the collective came together, the challenges they faced along the way, and our hopes for the initiative to be more than a stopgap solution.
I guess my first question is, how did you exactly band together? I think it was you, Phoebe English, Bethany Williams, and then I think,
Cosette.
Yes.
Cosette
got involved as well, thank you. So the four of you kind of bound together and very quickly created the Emergency Designer Network with an Instagram, a GoFundMe page, etc. So how exactly did you once you guys had banded together to create this sort of cooperative, what was the first step really after finding out about the need for this private sector to kind of fill in the hole of missing PPE for the front line?
It from my side, it initially started as an individual because I was being approached directly by hospitals, by NHS trusts.
Were you? Wow.
Patients saying, we desperately need stuff, assorted PPE. Can you manufacture anything for us? And I'm such a small, designer and small manufacturing capabilities. I guess alarm bells started to ring for me when the fact that they were actually, basically, I don't even know how they were contacting me, just contacting any small designers that they thought they might have a chance with. And I reached out to Phoebe because she has quite a good network regards sustainability. Mm-hmm. And I thought, okay, let's see if, I wasn't sort of thinking it would have the scale that it has achieved, but I was thinking, let's see if we can sort of utilise what she has via that and maybe help in a small way. It turned out then that her and Bethany had sort of already connected, having been approached in a similar way by different hospitals, etc. And we just decided, as with anything, strength in numbers, that collectively our combined network was going to have much more impact than if we sort of tried to do something about it singly. Yeah. And it kind of became as well something that was a little bit about injecting a bit of positivity into our industry, because obviously particularly a lot of smaller designer businesses, but across the whole spectrum, fashion is going to be hit quite hard by the situation. And obviously, a lot of people on furlough, a lot of uncertainty, funding, who knows what's happening with Fashion Week. So it became about also kind of utilising the skill set, about sort of recognising the craftsmanship and the kind of tools that we have as a collective, and trying to kind of give people that were possibly feeling a little bit hopeless about situations something positive to focus on, whilst obviously addressing an incredibly urgent need for what was out there. Utilising, our network as designers in terms of smaller designers that can also make, and bigger brands that would have larger capacity, particularly using Cosette to kind of target the kind of digital media, the social media, other PRs, and sort of see if we could get brands to kind of basically finance the fabric. Because the whole thing's a completely voluntary initiative. No one's making any money from it. We're just literally using any donations to buy the raw materials. Then all the kind of skills, the time, the manufacturing, everything's donated free. So we, for example, Reese have been very supportive. They've bought us a great deal of fabric. They've kind of got makers to work on the project. They've been very kind of proactive in their sort of involvement. So it was really about bringing together as much as we possibly could as a body of people. And then there was such a kind of good feeling amongst our peers and the brands that we're working with about it. It grew from there quite rapidly. The initial intention was that there would be 10 designers or makers working on it. At the last count, I think it was 140.
Wow.
And it's kind of still going from there. And we were quite kind of focused in that I have a specific mentor that works a lot with the Royal Free Hospital. So we kind of took them as not our case study, but they were willing to put the time in to sort of work with us on developing a prototype. So we cut a pattern from their existing scrubs, making it as close to the original as we possibly could. They then signed off the prototype. We had a discussion with them about sterilisation, because we were kind of aware that we spent 2 weeks actually when we first sort of got together, when it was just me, Phoebe and Bethany, about 2.5 weeks kind of trying to work with Whitehall, with the NHS directly via Fashion Roundtable and Make It British. And literally got absolutely nowhere. And retrospectively, it was incredibly frustrating, but also quite devastating, because there was huge manufacturers there that have massive capacity, and no clarity was emerging, and they wouldn't really loosen the sort of guidelines around any of the PPE. So despite the fact people were, had nothing to wear or were buying their own supplies from B&Q, etc., they wouldn't cut any leeway on the kind of technical specifications. So scrubs kind of fall through the loophole, because they're a garment that is worn in hospital, but they're not actually a technically protective garment. They're not water repellents. We were like, okay, we can make them, and we can make them properly. And we wanted to do them as correctly as we could. So we kind of sourced and started working with an NHS fabric supplier, so that we knew that the materials we were using were up to scratch. We then sterilise everything by washing it at 90 degrees before it goes to the hospitals. So they're as good as what they would buy from an actual medical outfitters. And we were kind of confident that we could achieve that. And also in terms of the make well, that they would last. It was about not creating something that was going to just have one shot and then be binned. We wanted them to be reusable.
Right. How amazing to think through the sort of, because I mean, that's one thing that's a bit worrying, which is, all this need for PPE, but so much of it being so disposable, and how that's so counterintuitive to sort of the discussion around sustainability that we're having within the fashion industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we were really conscious of making ours durable, which is, focusing on the making sure they can be washed regularly at 90 degrees and kind of withstand that. And through the sort of fabrics we sourced, we were kind of confident that we could create something of that spec. But there's going to be a huge amount of waste from this, and there's a lot of quite reactive buying going on. So people aren't really, considering the impact of this at all, or looking at the longer term picture, which is, as you say, incredibly worrying. We've been trying to work on gowns as well, but it's very difficult to kind of meet the spec that's required. And hospitals are still being, as they should be, very kind of specific about what they want, but we're kind of trying to push the reusable options into the frame, whereas it actually is sometimes cheaper and faster for them just to get the single use. So it's a little bit of a losing battle, just purely in terms of the kind of gravity of what they need and the speed they need it at, with the sort of longer term sustainable outlook, which is, again, another thing that with foresight could have been completely prevented. But we're in this situation now, so we're just trying to kind of minimise our waste from it, using any of the offcuts that we have from the scrubs that we're making to donate to other groups that are making masks, etc. So they're not, again, to the medical spec, but at least it can have a bit of a sort of extended life through being something that is washable.
That's a wonderful way to sort of be able to at least answer a little bit to that tension. And one of the things that was really surprising to me after an update of the GoFundMe page, which I love how, I think when I first donated, it was like at £3,000, and then it went up to, £5, and now it's at a £25,000 goal, which is so close to being met, if not already surpassed, I'm not sure. But one of the things in your updates was, that this whole initiative exposed, again, another terrifying fact that many private businesses, in fact, had PPE available to give to the front line. But despite trying to get in touch with the government, they never heard back, and how you guys, EDN, became the central sort of connector to try to get these disparate supplies that were already here in the UK. I mean, you mentioned how frustrating those first 2 weeks were. What other kind of surprising or really challenging navigation that you've had to contend with, given all, the learnings that you've made?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have not foreseen that side of the operation at all, to be honest, before we kind of started. That was a kind of offshoot that was very welcome, but not something we'd kind of originally considered. Sure. And the quantities of things that we were sort of talking about that were being offered to us to either purchase or for donation were pretty sizable. So, we had 100,000 gowns at one point, 50,000 masks, this kind of stuff. So as much as we tried. Then I connected with a charity called Med Supply UK, and they also work with a group called Shield. So they kind of distribute, they're actually run by medics, and they distribute nationwide across the UK with donations. So any businesses that have kind of dead stock, bits and pieces of PPE, actually a lot of the beauty industry had things that were relevant in terms of again, disposable gowns and masks from nail salons, that kind of thing. So it kind of all mounts up. It might be sort of, hundreds or thousands of things, but by the time they've kind of gathered it, they have quite a huge kind of distribution, if you like. And we wanted to utilise that network for what we were doing, but also saw it as a good way to kind of, as you say, join the dots between some of these businesses that were massively frustrated, because a lot of people have been trying to contact government or get the relevant NHS contacts in order to kind of move on what they have in some way, and are just being met with silence. So at least we could give them something that was responsive. Whether it came to fruition or not, we could at least put them into hands that may be able to either purchase or connect them with hospital trusts, and kind of work in that way. So wherever possible, we're obviously trying to get stuff for free to put into the supply chain, because everything we make is just given to hospitals. And this is sort of in addition to sort of any funding that they might have for PPE, but some of them have much bigger needs, and it was kind of looking at how agile they could be in terms of their purchasing power as well. So, they might not have the budget to buy 100,000, but if they connected with another couple of trusts who we might also be working with, then they could sort of fund the whole lot of units, if you like. So I think in a weird way, we've been laughing because ironically, I think working in fashion has stood us in quite good stead in terms of how quickly we react to stuff, because we're kind of working on shows and kind of, having to change things and adapt to stuff so quickly. It makes us be quite agile in that sense, which a lot of the organisations and sort of bodies that we're coming into contact with, they're just not used to reacting at that pace. Whereas we're used to just saying, we need it right now, get it.
How ironic, the flexibility and the sort of problem solving of the fashion, industry, and how you guys have essentially kind of replaced or become part of an arm of like the political system that just doesn't work, and the inertia there, and how incredibly fast you guys can react is a real blessing that I think so many of us are feel such optimism but also such despair.
No, absolutely. I mean, there's points where it has been so busy that there's not been much time to sort of reflect on it in a negative way. But ultimately, it has been, I would say, an amazing reflection on the fashion industry and the creative industries in terms of, we've had some great support from kind of artists and designers, and the sort of proactivity within that has been actually very practical, which is quite contrary to what a lot of people would think. I think if you said, we've got a group of fashion designers bonding together to do this, they'd be like, oh, well, that's not going to make much impact. But we've actually been able to, through using Net-a-Porter and matches for our logistics, and we're working with great brokers. We've got like a nationwide free delivery network immediately. We were able to get that up on the ground very quickly. So there's things about the industry that have come to light that show that actually it is actually quite fundamental, and a lot of the links that are there are so important and applicable to a lot of different situations and scenarios.
How incredible. I have just a couple of other questions. So like the big brands, you mentioned the high street brand Reese, who really galvanized makers and material. I think John Smedley has been another who have really pivoted their factory and resources. Have they helped speed up or provide more capacity than, say, like individual makers? Have you been surprised by the take-up or the lack thereof from the big brands that have these capacities?
Yeah, I think I've been pleasantly surprised. I think our initial our aim was essentially we wanted this to be completely inclusive. So it didn't matter if one person was going to make 20 things or if one brand was going to make 2,000. They were all equally relevant and everyone had a part to play in it. So almost when we started talking about people making hundreds and thousands of things, it became obviously music to my ears because I'm aware of the kind of time frame, and I'm the sort of direct point of contact with the hospitals and the trusts, so I'm kind of the one that's organising, if you like, behind the scenes. So I can see who needs what and how quickly they need it. So the minute, for example, John Smedley say they can make 1,000+ sets, they financed all the fabric themselves, and they were really comfortable. Like I've got a working relationship with them, so they kind of know how I operate and I know how they work. So it made it very easy for them to kind of work under our umbrella, if you like.
Yeah.
We're working with, for example, Drake's are making like 100 sets with their kind of home workers. So there's lots of different scales within it, but they all just show a willingness to participate. And it's interesting that a lot of them are British focused brands. We're doing, as I said, a lot of stuff with matches, so they're doing logistics but also manufacturing through Ray. So it helps us in terms of, the minute someone says they can make more than 500, that's good for us, because if we've got 50 people making 20 each, yes, that mounts up, but just to sort of hit the bulk that we're getting requests for, to have something that's kind of 500 to 1,000 is a huge help, just in terms of the overall numbers and the speed at which they can turn it around.
Yeah, how incredible. Okay, let's say another month, who knows, nobody knows, how do you take this forward? Is this something that the minute everybody sort of gets back into their factories at, maybe half capacity, full capacity, how are you thinking about what you guys are doing long term? Is there opportunity for this to continue going, or is this like a real stopgap Band-Aid solution?
I hope that there's sort of longevity in it. I mean, a sort of core part of the initial discussion, and from our side, because both myself, Phoebe and Bethany, we all actually manufacture in the UK to quite a large extent. Me and Phoebe completely. I think Bethany pretty much completely. So we kind of knew the benefits of that, if you like. There's obviously a longer term discussion about, yes, it's probably more expensive than making it in China, but that means it's on your doorstep, you can access it quickly. And this had obviously been kind of looked in the PPE supply chain previously by the government, because everything was being imported, whereas there's a lot of incredible skills and craftsmen within the UK manufacturing system existing that are ready and willing to take up this challenge and to, and as they've proved, to meet the sort of supply and demand that the PPE industry requires. So I think for us, a big part of it was, whether we actually do end up working with these people or not, to collate the information about all these different manufacturers, about the fabrication, so that we have a kind of a dossier, if you like, that we can kind of hand over to government, or, when this is all over, this will be investigated, and it will be, this will be looked into to sort of make the government accountable for the situation and what has unfolded with it. And we wanted to ensure that we had something that proved that there was a breadth and depth to UK manufacturing that was definitely a very valid and important thing for them to consider moving forward. And anything that we can do longer term within that conversation, I think, is incredibly important. And I've always been really passionate about working with UK brands, because I love going to the factory, and it's a completely different relationship when you can go there and speak to the manufacturer to see the things in progress. It's about that reactivity and that agility. You can achieve that much more if you can have more personal relationships with the people that are creating the product for you. And I would hope that there's a recognition of that longer term from government and from the NHS, that we can kind of assist them with, connect them. We've got a lot of information. A lot of different people in different groups are sort of running to address this, that will have equally different contacts and valid things to input. So I think it's about really collating that comprehensively and hopefully setting up something that can actually support UK manufacturing to help us recover from this situation as well. Yeah,
no. Holly, you're incredible. You guys are doing such an incredible job, and thank you. That's perfect and so insightful, and so just like I said, both so optimistic and so terrifying.
To hear more podcasts from Tank, you can subscribe on all major podcast platforms or follow us on SoundCloud. The theme music for this podcast is taken from Waiting Games by Kate Simcoe and the London Electronic Orchestra.